in reverse order.
How's Sam doing?
They're doing great.
They like it?
Yes, yes.
And Karen?
Everything we saw last week in Minneapolis did very well. Yeah, that's what I was
School, so it's rigorous and...
No, I mean, he's not taking the full load, so.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Like
Was it really cool?
It was 3 beautiful days. The first day was definitely chillier than we left, but the day we left, it was warmer there than it was here. That was last Monday.
Wow.
Yeah. It gets very hot there in the summer, too. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I didn't either. Yeah, it really does.
So they're not freezing all the time.
No.
That's interesting. It must be pretty, too, with all that water.
It was. We saw the Mississippi River, we saw other water.
Oh.
And you know, it's a really, it's a very livable city. It's all, a lot of places are mixed apartments and houses.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people.
Yeah.
But traffic is intense, right?
Well, no, the downtown is like empty.
Oh.
Yeah. And I think from what I could tell is that like it's not crazy here. You know, you can find an apartment. You know.
That's good.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, they're fall like this.
And yours?
Oh, everybody's hanging in there. Marcus is finding out classes and not even homesick, just like in a new place and expecting nothing to be art.
Right.
Hello.
Good morning, guys. Thanks for
They
coming.
were having fun.
Yeah, looks to be a full bar.
So I wonder what kind of tree.
Don't know.
Was nothing was on, the microwave wasn't on.
I think when people start coming in, you should just like enter, rejoice, and come in.
Okay, all right. That's crazy, just so that it's like, okay, turn the page, done with that.
Oh, God. The worship committee. Hope it's not that little flame.
No, we put it out, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I would put it out.
The worship committee sent a letter for Friday saying we couldn't contribute his congregational medicine and we would meet on it as soon as possible. We're not going to do it before. And if he still decides, no, we don't want to let this election and what needs to happen for it.
Right.
So what's the trigger?
Especially now.
Singing, and guess who was leading some of them? Blue Boat Home author Peter Mayer was up there. Yes, playing guitar and leading it, and then another hymn, and the organist was up there.
Oh my goodness, how fantastic. What a difference.
What a difference. Huge.
Well, I hope we're crawling out of this.
Yeah, so they got singing.
Yeah. Now I can just anything wants it.
And you know, and do you think there is faith? What is it?
Yeah, show us the research, show us the numbers. It's 361, so I'm going to play that.
Good morning. And a most unusual morning it has been, but now we're back to normal. My name is Nora Mulligan, and I'm the Vice President of the Board of Trustees. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley. Whether you've been with this congregation a decade or more, or this is your first time visiting, we welcome you. Whatever the faith and traditions of your past, we welcome you. Whatever your theological stance, we welcome you. Whoever you are and whomever you love, we welcome you. Whatever your heritage, we welcome you. We respectfully acknowledge the territory on which our church building sits as the ancestral homeland of the Munsee, Lenape, and Wappinger people. Surprisingly, I don't have any announcements today. For the most up-to-date information, please refer to our weekly e-newsletter and check our website frequently. The website is also the place where you can find contact information for our staff, Board of Trustees, and other congregational leaders. And please join us for conversation after this service. If you're present in the sanctuary, you can join us in the parking lot. If you're watching the live stream, your Saturday morning UUCHV email reminder has the link that you can click on to join a virtual coffee hour. If you are just recently joining us and would like to receive our weekly e-news, please email us with your name and we will make sure that you're added to our e-news list. We can answer any questions you may have also. Email us at uucroton@gmail.com or fill out one of the yellow cards in the back of the pews and drop it in the collection plate. If you're present in the sanctuary, please silence your cell phones at this time. And once again, we welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley.
Look to this day and the promise that it holds. Greet it with gladness. Look to the friend whose face blooms with pleasure at the sight of you. Look as well to the stranger, the woman or man or child whose hand clasps yours in unspoken, undefined promise. It is you alone who has the power to give such a moment definition. Look to the path that lies ahead. It awaits the mark of your feet as you set out boldly. Only you can create its meaning, or let it fall into oblivion, a day that has brought you only dust and shadows. You are the chooser. Look well to this day.
Good morning. The chalice lighting words are from Brian Keeley. In times of darkness, we stumble toward the tiny flame. Whoops, wait a minute. Oh, okay. In times of darkness, we stumble toward the tiny flame. In times of cold, we seek the warming fire. In times of repression, we reach for the lamp of truth. In times of loss, we pray for the comforting light. In times of joy, we light a candle of celebration. Spirit of life, as we kindle this light, help us find what we need this day. Now, please join me in saying our Unison Affirmation. The words are in your order of service. Inspired by love, our mission is to seek our true nature, connect deeply and openly, and act for justice. Let us now bear witness to the joys and sorrows experienced in our community. If you have a personally significant joy or sorrow that you're willing to share, please come up to the microphone to my left and speak it. Come up very close to the microphone on my left and speak it loudly and clearly so that even with your mask on, we can all hear you. The microphone will allow our friends watching virtually to hear what you are saying. I will light a candle for each. If you would prefer to only have a candle lit without speaking, please just stand and I will light a candle for you.
I'm Nora Mulligan, and I have a joy. Yesterday, I spent 3 hours with my friend Nina playing cello together, and it was wonderful.
I'm Dave Morkel. I have a joy. Last weekend, Kathy and I went to Minneapolis and spent the weekend with our oldest son, Peregrine. We were also able to go to Unity Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Minneapolis and sing hymns with mask on. It was glorious. And the fact that we got to sing Blue Boat Home, accompanied by the person who wrote the words, Peter Mayer, in the congregation on his guitar, was absolutely excellent.
This is a sorrow and a joy. My friend Isabel will be taking her own life tomorrow with the California Physician-Assisted Suicide Program. We had our last talk yesterday. She said that she's more spiritual than I am by far. She said, if you ever are in a situation where there's no wind at all and the leaves are absolutely still, but you see one leaf waving, that's her waving at But she's been repeating a line to all the many people she's been talking to for the last time, which I gave her. The mixture that she has to drink, they say use a straw, because if you're holding a glass, you might not be able to finish in time and you won't get enough of it. And I said in a previous conversation, well, that's the last straw.
We also acknowledge all the unspoken joys and sorrows held within the sanctuary of our hearts, and all those people who have yet to find a spiritual home where they can share their joys and sorrows.
I invite you now to join in the spirit of meditation. You may want to do so by sitting up straight in your pew, putting your feet flat on the floor. Close your eyes if you wish to, or leave them just slightly opened. And slowly take in a nice deep breath and gently release it, releasing all of the stress of the week. These words are by Cornel West. We have a love so deep. We have a commitment to justice, since justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. We've got a commitment to a cause. Some of us call it the beloved community. Some of us call it radical democracy. Some of us call it the best of America. Some of us call it the best of the world house. Whatever your language is, just make sure you're putting in that integrity, honesty, decency, and virtue at the center of it. And you are spiritually and morally prepared to be able to go hand in hand with the new ways that are trying to transform an America so now diseased by increasing wealth inequality, so diseased by vicious legacies of white supremacy and male supremacy. May that vision become our reality. I invite you now to join in a moment of silent meditation.
Sharon Welch was raised in a small farming community in West Texas, the daughter of 2 social gospel ministers. Welch, a Unitarian Universalist, taught theology and religion and society at Harvard from 1982 to 1991. She taught religious studies and women's and gender studies at the University of Missouri from 1991 until 2007, when she became the provost of Meadville Lombard Theological School, the Unitarian Universalist Seminary. Welch's feminist ethic of risk was born of her experiences in the feminist movement and her observation that those who engage in justice struggles always do so from a position of incomplete understanding and limited perspective. In the feminist movement, she learned that it is impossible to control or guarantee the outcome or success of a particular action. She asked, how does a movement persist in the face of partial victories and continued defeats? She answered that one must take responsible action within the limits of bounded power and name the resources that evoke persistent defiance and resistance in the face of repeated defeats. An ethic of risk. Welch states that the complexity of social problems and the inability to perceive how they might be resolved often results in a middle-class failure of nerve, defined as the inability to persist in resistance when the problems are seen in their full magnitude. The resulting cynicism and despair is a privilege of the affluent, who can detach from the day-to-day issues of oppression. She writes, it is easier to give up on long-term social change when one is comfortable in the present, when it is possible to have challenging work, excellent health care and housing, and access to the fine arts. When the good life is present or within reach, it is tempting to despair of its ever being in reach for others and resort merely to enjoying it for oneself and one's family. Welch learned from the stories and literature of oppressed people, particularly women of color, as she pondered the ability of oppressed communities to continue to resist generation after generation. She writes, the ethic of risk is characterized by 3 elements, each of which is essential to maintain resistance in the face of overwhelming odds: a redefinition of responsible action, grounding in community, and strategic risk-taking.
It was one of those General Assemblies, a super hot afternoon in one of those cities in America where you really shouldn't be out in the midday sun. New Mexico, Nashville, Fort Worth, Fort Lauderdale, something or another. They all kind of bleed together when you go to General Assembly in person. And if you've ever been to a big convention, you know it can be a pretty rough slog sometimes. Going from one event to another, overscheduled, back-to-back seminars with overly earnest facilitators and too many opportunities to share with your neighbor on a topic both of you are utterly ignorant of, because that's why you went to the workshop in the first place. And when it's General Assembly, add in worship services, required and optional, a nightly dance, endlessly long reports from UUA officials that you're only kind of vaguely familiar with what their job is, and the amendments on the amendments on the amendments needed to just say a thing that we all basically agree with anyway. It can be a bit much. And for us ministers, this baton death march happens at the very end of the church year with the sweet fruit of summer vacation just about to touch your lips. They're 2 or 3 days before General Assembly, just for ministers and some other folks, called Ministry Days. And most years, Ministry Days kind of has the tone of a MASH unit. I know it's been a hard year, but it's almost over. Just hang in there and try to keep something in the tank. And so as General Assembly is winding up, we ministers in particular need a moment of rest and relaxation. One of my good friends, whose name I am withholding in case anyone from his congregation ever hears these words, he and I decided to be a bit naughty and play hooky from General Assembly. Now, the other thing to know about General Assembly is it's usually held, as I said, in some downtown convention center. And so you spend ungodly amounts of money on food and drink. My friend and I saw that there was some demonstration for, I'm sure, what was a worthy cause for some local organization making the world a better place. And he and I decided that we needed to reenact that scene from the Psalms, you know, the one that says your soul is restored by resting beside distilled waters. So we decided to sit outside in the warm afternoon having a beer. You know, one of those beers that just come in those glasses. It's really like 2, you know. And while we're chatting and enjoying ourselves, we noticed that across the street at the convention center where General Assembly is being held, a number of people were gathering. And so many, in fact, we were seeing colleagues and friends of ours walking by. Soon a line started to form, and people were wearing those sort of, you know, the same bright orange-yellow shirts, which have been scientifically engineered to be the loudest, most obnoxious color to the human eye. Then he and I realized that not only were we playing hooky from the rally that was supposed to be going on in the General Assembly schedule, but that same rally was lining up and camped out directly across the street from where we had gathered, looking like 2 guys out of a Jimmy Buffett concert. We got a few jeers from our friends, to be sure, probably jealous that they hadn't thought of it, because here we were, 2 straight white guys, the patriarchy embodied, not going to the protest, but enjoying the wealth of our privilege. This was the sort of thing they would say to us, you know, you ministers can be very cruel when trying to be funny. Well, a few years later, I would be in Texas, and knowing all too well what it's like to go to be in a protest and be on the wrong side of the patriarchy. One of the first things I did when I started my ministry in San Antonio was actually to attend a protest. I'd been on the job, I think, 1 week when I got a call from no less than Meg Barnhouse, who serves the first UU Austin. Now, I was, and still am, a Meg Barnhouse fanboy. I love her books. And she was inviting me to a protest for a person that had been in sanctuary in the Austin church for a few months. This person was living in sanctuary in the church and, illegally, literally speaking, illegally. And this person was leaving the friendly confines, if you will, of that sanctuary in the Austin congregation and headed to San Antonio for trial. It's where an ICE facility is. And so members from that congregation, as well as a number of my new local colleagues, would be there to sort of be in support of this person. So this was the first time that I've even met ministers who would become good friends of mine down there. This protest was also my first exposure to Texas politics, which, let me tell you, is a good deal different than Delaware politics, which I had been accustomed to 7 years before. In Delaware, you see Chris Coons walking out of the gym. You know, I would pass him in the hall at the Chase Center. That's the building, actually, where Joe Biden accepted the nomination. You may remember the drones flying around outside. That was the Chase Center in Wilmington. Heck, I even went to dinner with Joe and Jill Biden once at the YWCA, a favorite cause of Jill Biden's. Public officials just sort of all over the place in a little bitty state like Delaware. I remember when Delaware affirmed same-sex marriages a couple of years before the Supreme Court ruled on that. We hardly had to convince anybody. I even got to deliver the benediction at the Delaware State Senate. It was small and it was easy to get stuff done. But when I moved to Texas, whoo doggy, we were playing a different sport. Not the same league, a whole new sport. Texas's legislature meets for only 200 days every 2 years, not even every year. The joke is that the goal is for the legislature to eventually meet for 2 days every 200 years. Actually, I always preferred the other joke about Texas, which was that it's too small to be its own country and too large to be its own mental hospital. The recent abortion bill coming out of Texas is nothing new. This is every couple years when the legislature's in session, a law like this gets passed, some ridiculous thing that's meant to restrict abortion, see how far they can push the limits of Roe versus Wade. And every 2 years they do this, and every 2 years it climbs its way to the Supreme Court or not, and they are trying to see, you know, it's kind of like a game of chicken, only with the American Constitution and decades of legal precedent. The only thing that makes it different now is that the court has swung so far to the right, and Ginsburg is no longer there, that it could be the year where this little gamble works and some or all of Roe gets chipped away. Welcome, y'all, to Texas politics. It is irrational, insane, and driven by the religious right. State-level gerrymandering has ensured conservative majorities in both houses, and the governor and the lieutenant governor seem to be in a weird competition to see which one of them can outflank the other on the right, no matter how loony it makes them sound. Abortion, of course, is the crowd favorite, but the dynamics are there for everything from the power outage from last year to mixed messages around masking mandates, while at the same time experiencing some of the worst of the pandemic crunch on Texas hospitals. Now, things are changing. Texas is actually turning purple and may even go blue in a cycle or two. But for now, that certainly is not the case, which made that rally in San Antonio for this person living in sanctuary in the Austin church seem a little futile. Fortunately, it all worked out. She was able to stay in sanctuary. She was not arrested. And while it didn't happen that particular day, eventually she was given the ability to stay in America legally and could leave the church and go wherever she wanted. And while this was kind of one of the success stories of the sanctuary movement in Texas, it was but a mere drop in the bucket to the hundreds and thousands of immigrants who got, shall we say, a pretty raw deal from both the Trump administration and the state of Texas specifically. Demoralized. That's what it feels like. And yet, if you aren't there protesting and speaking up, who will? Do you just sit there and stay home when you see injustice? I guess you could. Plenty of people do, sadly. I sympathize a little bit with the nihilist in Texas. It's easy, it's convenient, it's comfortable. Despite all the protests and rallies and demonstrations, it often didn't feel like it came to much. Nothing changed, or nothing changed from my point of view. We just kept doing this same thing over and over again. I'll never forget the day after the inauguration in 2017. The next weekend is when women and men and trans brothers and sisters enjoyed, and everyone came out for demonstrations in nearly every city in America, protesting the new president, his comments, and indeed his actions regarding women and minorities. And in those days, we barely knew how bad things would get, but we knew it was bad. I knew that those protests wouldn't change anything. I don't think anyone had some grand strategy that now that we've done this, Trump won't be president anymore, but it was a message that was so passionately held that it had to be expressed in public. Cornel West said, "Social justice is what love looks like in public." Looking back, it's notable to compare those protests to the January 6th riot. When liberals lost, we protest. Let the anger from losing carry us forward. We transform it with love. When the other side lost, they wanted to wreck the system. Something happened to me when I was in Texas in regard to social justice. When you're doing it, even when you know you'll likely lose, it changes your motivation for doing social justice work. I think there are a number of those of us who come to Unitarian Universalism for spiritual depth and the intellectual breadth that it presents to us. Those are some of the qualities that I most like about it. But our theology, our values, even our beloved principles are all abstractions. They are words that we print on mugs and bookmarks, but they don't mean much unless they penetrate our heart. They have to get into how we feel and not just how we think. They have to worm their way into our consciousness when we're faced with life's difficulties. Those principles on the mug and the ideas from building your own theology class have to be consulted when we're forced to make difficult decisions or in an ethical quandary. Otherwise, what is the point of religion? If those pretty ideas and fanciful notions do not transfer over into direct application and concrete action, then what the heck are we doing anyway? Living in Texas helped me come to see that we cannot and absolutely should not put a strong barrier between spirituality and social justice. There are a number of ways to reconcile these two, probably as many as there are spiritual activists out there. I think of spiritual activism kind of as happening at two levels. First is, of course, the level of the issue before us that one is working on, or a ruling that's coming for the present moment. Like a good meditator, social justice activists have to stay in that present moment. If the issue is climate change or police funding, it is important to get focused, to define success, build relationships with people and institutions with standing, and act on points of leverage. That's community organizing 101. When done well, churches and members who participate in those actions can have their social footprint magnified. A small UU congregation can get the ear of senators and governors and mayors if they're willing to live into that interdependent web and work alongside Catholics and Lutherans and Jewish organizations that promote common causes. But victories don't happen every day. Fewer and far between in places like Texas. So there has to be a deeper level for the spiritual practice of social justice. Spiritual activism, if you want to call it that. One of the most powerful, I believe, comes to us from our reading this morning in the form of Sharon Welch. She notes that most of the big issues that we work on involve situations that are so big and changes that are so vast that it will more than likely take more than one generation for them to bring them about. And thus, social justice also has to be a form of religious education. Part of what we do when going to those demonstrations and protests is that we're showing and consequently teaching the next generation what we stand for. A rogue president or a spineless politician are not what I'm about. I want my sons to know what I valued and what was important to me. I want them to have some fire in the belly for, about injustice and outrage at pain and suffering, and not to be paralyzed with either fear or indifference, but inspired to look for that new vision. Imagine a world in a new and more just and loving way. I won't be around all the time to drive them to these rallies. Eventually they're going to have to drive themselves there. Hopefully they'll drive their children and their children's children too. In the movie Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Rose says, "This is how we will win this war, not by destroying what we hate, but by preserving what we love." It's an interesting distinction, and one I didn't first appreciate when I first heard it. Preserving things means loving them first. It starts with love as the foundation. And again, this isn't love in some kind of abstract Greek sense. This is a feeling of love that is akin to the heartache because injustice is happening to one of my fellow human creatures. And the more we're open to feelings like that pain, the more likely we are to respond in a more positive way when it arises. So that feeling, that pain for the other, empathizing with suffering, that's a spiritual process through and through. And transforming that anger that comes up and presents itself to us so that we can use that anger as the motivation for some positive action. Well, that's nothing short of tantric. In fact, that's exactly the teaching of Tantra, that negative things can be transformed into positive things. One of the things that I wished I had done is not played hooky on General Assembly Day, but had gone to that rally, not because I was tired and needed a break, but because of what it says about who I am and what I want to say to my kids as well. Our lives are our religious education lessons to our children. May we consider the curriculum very carefully. May we choose the path of love and justice more than the path of ease and comfort. For in the end, we will have left the world a better place than what we found it, and our children will live out that legacy as well. I love you. Go in peace. Amen.
Each week we make an offering from the bounty we are blessed to enjoy. We do this in a spirit of love and generosity, aware that we have benefited from those who have gone before, those who in their turn gave generously. Our offering goes to support the work of love and justice undertaken by this community. Today's offering will also be shared with the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. Please refer to our e-newsletter or website for more information. You can make your donation in several ways. If present in the sanctuary, you may give cash or a check in the offering plate as it comes by. You may also scan the QR code in your order of service. And from your homes, you can make your donation via credit card or PayPal using the links provided in the e-newsletter. Please remember to give a little extra to compensate for the 3% surcharge. Or if you prefer, you can always mail us a check. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Please join me in the dedication of the offering. The words are in your order of service. May these gifts and the work of our hands and hearts give power to all we stand for as a community of faith. Please join me in extinguishing the chalice. The words are found in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
And now may the blessings of life be upon us and upon this congregation. May the memories we gather here give us hope for the future. May the love that we share bring strength and joy to our hearts. And may the peace of this community be with us until we meet again.